The Kriegsmarine's Bismarck was the terror of the sea until a biplane crippled its rudder. Dawn, May 24, 1941, the Denmark Strait. A cold, gray expanse of water, choked with drifting ice and a low, clinging mist. The wind carries a biting chill, the only sound the groan of metal and the rush of water. Against steel hulls, two Titans cut through the gloom. To the north, His Majesty's battlecruiser Hood, a legend of the British Empire, sleek and immense. Alongside her, the new battleship Prince of Wales, her paint still fresh. To the south, shadows resolve into forms. The heavy cruiser Prince Eugen leads, and behind her, a silhouette of breathtaking, malevolent power, the battleship Bismarck. Her superstructure is a forest of steel, her main batteries, 4 twin turrets housing 8 15-inch guns trained to port. Aboard Hood, a flag signal snaps in the wind. Execute the turn. The range closes. 25,000 yards, 20,000. The air is electric, thick with the scent of salt and fuel oil. At 0552. The silence is obliterated. Orange fire erupts from Bismarck's forward turrets. The sound takes long seconds to arrive, a deep, rolling thunder that strikes the chest before it registers in the ears. The shells, each the weight of a small car, trace a high, graceful arc across the leaden sky. They are not merely projectiles, they are promises of annihilation. They reach their apex and begin their descent, whistling down towards the Hood at supersonic speed. The terror of the sea has spoken its first words. This opening salvo would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to one of the most improbable and decisive moments in naval history. To understand the terror the Bismarck represented, one must first understand the strategic dilemma of the Kriegsmarine. For Germany, a traditional land power, the sea was a secondary theater, but a crucial one. The goal was not to defeat the Royal Navy, a grand Jutland-style fleet action. That was a battle they could not win. The goal was to strangle Britain. This was the philosophy of the Handelskrieg, commerce warfare, German naval strategists envisioned a campaign of surface raiders, powerful, independent warships that could slip into the vast shipping lanes of the Atlantic. They would hunt alone, evading superior forces, and sink merchant vessels carrying the vital lifeline of food, fuel, and materiel from North America to the British Isles. Each sunken freighter was a blow to British morale and industrial capacity. The goal was economic collapse. From this doctrine, the Bismarck-class battleship was born. She was not merely a warship, she was a strategic weapon system designed for a very specific, lethal purpose. Laid down in 1936 at the Blohm and Voss shipyard in Hamburg, she was a product of Nazi ambition and German engineering prowess. When launched in 1939, she was the largest and most powerful battleship in the world, a symbol of the Reich's resurgent military might. Her specifications were staggering: a full-load displacement of over 50,000 tons, a main armament of 838 cm SKC-34 guns, housed in 4 robust twin turrets. These weapons could hurl an 800-kilogram armor-piercing shell over 36 kilometers with devastating accuracy. Her protection was equally formidable: a main armored belt of Krupp-cemented steel, over 320 millimeters thick, sloped to increase its effective resistance. Her armored deck was designed to withstand plunging fire from great distances. She was fast too, capable of 30 knots, allowing her to outrun any battleship she could not outgun. She was, in essence, the perfect raider, too powerful for any single escort to confront, and too fast for any battle group to catch. Her very existence forced the Royal Navy to commit massive resources to convoy protection, stretching their global fleet to its breaking point. The Bismarck was more than steel and gunpowder. She was a psychological weapon, a ghost that haunted the Admiralty's worst nightmares before she had even fired a shot in anger. But a weapon is useless in its scabbard. By the spring of 1941, the pressure was on for the surface fleet to prove its worth and deliver a decisive blow. The plan was codenamed Operation Rheinübung, Operation Rhine Exercise. Its Objective was audacious, to unleash the Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen into the North Atlantic to attack the vital convoy routes. Command of the task force fell to Admiral Gunther Lütjens, a seasoned and cautious officer who had led successful earlier raiding missions. Flying his flag in the Bismarck, he was accompanied by the ship S. Captain Ernst Lindemann, a battleship commander to his corps, fiercely proud of his vessel and confident in her capabilities. Yet from the outset, the operation was fraught with misgivings and misfortune. Lütjens was deeply pessimistic. He understood the sheer numerical superiority of the Royal Navy and the fragility of his mission, which relied on stealth and weather for cover. Previous raid by the battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau had revealed a critical weakness: the vulnerability of German fuel supply ships, the clandestine tankers. Positioned across the ocean, the British were hunting them down systematically, strangling the logistical web that made long-range raiding possible. Furthermore, the Prince Eugen had suffered a mine explosion damage just weeks before. And though repaired, the incident cast a pall of ill omen. Lütjens argued for a delay, wanting to coordinate with the other major German capital ships then in port, but he was overruled by Grand Admiral Erich Rudder, who was desperate for a major surface victory to assert the Navy's importance against the dominant Luftwaffe and army. The political need for action overrode tactical prudence. On May 19, 1941, the task force slipped away from Gotenhafen in occupied Poland. They moved north, threading through the Kattegat and Skagerrak, their passage starkly visible from the neutral Swedish coast. Swedish aircraft and the cruiser Gotland shadowed them. The intelligence was swiftly passed to the British naval attaché. The Ghost had been sighted. The hunt was on. In London, the Admiralty's worst fears were realized. Every capital ship, every cruiser, every aircraft carrier within possible range was put on alert. The home fleet at Scapa Flow under Admiral Sir John Tovey scrambled. The battle-cruiser Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy and a symbol of British naval power for over 2 decades, was dispatched from Scapa Flow along with the new battleship Prince of Wales, which still had civilian technicians aboard working on her untested main armament. Their orders were simple: an absolute: patrol the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland and intercept the German force. The race to the kill zone had begun. 2 empires, 2 naval doctrines, and 2 legendary ships were now on a collision course in the icy, mist-shrouded waters of the North Atlantic. Within the 250-meter-long steel citadel of the Bismarck, a microcosm of the Third Reich lived, worked, and waited. Her crew numbered over 2,200 men, from seasoned chief petty officers who had served on the old pre-war Reichsmarine ships to young, fervent recruits born into the aftermath of the First World War. For these men, their ship was not just a weapon, it was a home, a symbol of national pride and the pinnacle of German engineering. Morale was initially sky-high. They were the chosen crew of the world's most powerful battleship, embarking on a mission to strike at the heart of the British Empire. Life aboard was a regimented existence of watchkeeping, drills, and maintenance, all conducted within the hum of machinery and the faint, ever-present smell of diesel paint and cooking. The ship was a marvel of modern amenities for its time, with spacious crew quarters compared to older vessels, efficient galleys, and even a laundry and a bakery. This comfort, however, was encased in immense psychological pressure. Every man knew they were sailing into the lion's den, that the entire Royal Navy would be hunting them. The initial euphoria of breaking out into the Atlantic was tempered by the constant strain of vigilance, scanning the empty horizon for a telltale smudge of smoke or the silhouette of a pursuing warship. They were alone in a hostile ocean, feeling that was both empowering and profoundly isolating. The Bismarck's reputation was built on a foundation of brutalist engineering and meticulous design. Her primary armament, the 8 15-inch guns, was controlled by a suite of advanced optics and rangefinders centered in the massive forward command tower. The main fire control director with its 10.5-meter baseline rangefinders, could calculate firing solutions at extreme ranges with terrifying precision. Her secondary armament of 12 5.9-inch guns was designed to shred any smaller vessel that dared to close the distance. But her true genius lay in her protection. The Bismarck was designed to be a floating fortress. Her immunity zone was a calculated range band where her own armor was theoretically impervious to enemy shells of a similar caliber. The core of this defense was the citadel, an armored box that protected the magazines, machinery, and command spaces. This was shielded by a 320mm main belt, angled at 17 degrees to increase its effective thickness against incoming fire, and a 100 to 120mm armored deck to defend against plunging shell fire. Her underwater protection featured a sophisticated system of compartments and bulges designed to absorb the shock and contain the damage of torpedo hits. This intricate layering of steel and compartmentalization created an aura of invincibility, a belief that she could absorb tremendous punishment and remain a fighting machine. In the war rooms of the British Admiralty, the mood was one of controlled panic. The sighting of the Bismarck triggered the single greatest naval mobilization of the war to that point for the Royal Navy. This was an existential threat, the memory of the German surface raiders of the First World War, which had necessitated a global hunt, was still fresh. If Bismarck broke loose into the Atlantic convoy lanes, the result would be carnage on an unimaginable scale, potentially severing Britain's lifeline. Every available ship was vectored towards the predicted path of the German task force. Admiral Tovey, aboard the flagship King George V, led the pursuit from the home fleet. The older battlecruiser Repulse was pulled from convoy duty and ordered to join the aircraft carrier Victorious. Despite being green and carrying an untested air group, was thrown into the hunt from the distant Mediterranean. Force H, centered on the battlecruiser Renown and the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, was recalled at high speed. The map in the Admiralty tracking room became a spiderweb of converging courses and frantic signals. This was not merely a tactical engagement, it was a battle for national survival, a test of the Royal Navy's centuries-old mastery of the seas. The pressure on every commander, from Tovey down to the captains of the shadowing cruisers, was immense. Failure was not an option, for failure meant starvation and defeat. At the heart of the Bismarck's command structure lay a critical and ultimately fatal divergence in philosophy. Admiral Gunther Lütjens, the fleet commander, was a complex fatalistic figure. A veteran of the earlier Scharnhorst and Gneisenau raid, he was acutely aware of the operation's fragility. He believed in strict radio silence and a doctrine of dispersal, striking quickly and then vanishing into the vastness of the ocean. He saw the Bismarck not as a duelist, but as a predator that should avoid a stand-up fight whenever possible. His command style was aloof, his communications with his crew sparse and often pessimistic. In stark contrast stood Captain Ernst Lindemann, the commander of the Bismarck itself. A battleship man through and through, he possessed an unshakable confidence in his vessel. Where Lütjens saw risk, Lindemann saw opportunity. This clash crystallized in the immediate aftermath of the Denmark Strait victory. After the sinking of the Hood and the damaging of the Prince of Wales, Lindemann advocated for turning back to finish off the wounded British battleship, a move that aligned with the Kriegsmarine's aggressive tactical doctrine. Lütjens, however, overruled him. His orders were to commerce raiding, not fleet destruction. He chose to break off and continue the mission, a decision born of strategic rigidity. This internal rift between the cautious strategist and the confident tactician would hamper the German response in the critical hours to come, creating a vacuum of decisive action at the very top. Against this backdrop of steel behemoths and grand strategy, the most unlikely of weapons was about to enter the narrative. The ferry Swordfish, to the modern eye, it was an anachronism, a biplane seemingly lost in time, with its fabric-covered fuselage Fixed landing gear and open cockpit, it was a relic of a bygone era of aviation. It was slow, with a top speed barely over 130 knots, making it vulnerable to both enemy fighters and modern anti-aircraft fire. Its crew of 3, pilot, observer, and telegraphist air gunner, were exposed to the elements and enemy fire. Yet this apparent weakness concealed a devastating utility. The Stringbag, as it was affectionately known, was incredibly robust and forgiving. It could carry a 1,610-pound torpedo or depth charges, and its low stall speed made it ideal for operations from the short, pitching decks of aircraft carriers in the North Atlantic's foul weather. Most crucially, it was available. It was the workhorse of the Fleet Air Arm, and it was from the decks of the Victorious and later the Ark Royal that these fragile-looking machines would be launched. They represented a new dimension of naval warfare, one where the outcome of a battle between giants could be decided by a handful of men in canvas and wood flying into the teeth of a modern warship's defenses. They were the underdog, the embodiment of a desperate navy's ability to innovate and fight with whatever tools it had at hand. It was this final angle, the intersection of archaic technology and modern naval necessity, that would set the stage for one of the most dramatic turning points in the history of naval warfare. The victory in the Denmark Strait was Pyrrhic. A single 14-inch shell from the Prince of Wales had struck the Bismarck's port side forward, piercing the hull below the armored belt. It failed to detonate, but it passed through a fuel bunker, rupturing critical lines. More importantly, it punctured the forward fuel tank. A slick of heavy oil began to trail behind the great battleship, a dark, viscous scar on the water that betrayed her position and her vulnerability. The Bismarck was bleeding. Admiral Lutyens now faced a critical decision. The element of surprise was lost. The entire home fleet was converging on his position. The hit had reduced his fuel reserves and contaminated other tanks with salt water, making a prolonged Atlantic raid impossible. His choices were grim: make a high-speed run for the relative safety of German-occupied France, or attempt to lose his pursuers in the open ocean. He chose the former, ordering Prince Eugen to break off and continue the commerce raid alone, while he set a course for Saint Nazaire, home to the only dry dock on the Atlantic coast, large enough to accommodate his ship. The Royal Navy's net, however, was tightening, shadowing cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk, using their advanced radar, clung doggedly to the Germans' wake, relentlessly broadcasting his position. From the west, Admiral Tovey with King George V and the battlecruiser Repulse charged to intercept. From the east, Force H with Ark Royal and Renown steamed at full speed to block the path to France. The Bismarck, trailing her telltale slick, was the center of a contracting circle of naval power. Then a moment of German brilliance. Lutyens, in a final, masterful act of command, ordered his ship to execute a wide, looping turn, doubling back towards his pursuers. The audacious move worked. The British cruisers, focused on their radar screens, lost contact in a rain squall for over 30 hours, from the evening of May 24th into the 25th. The Bismarck vanished. At the Admiralty, panic returned. The most dangerous warship afloat had slipped back into the vastness of the Atlantic. The hunt seemed lost. But Lutyens, believing he was safe, broke radio silence. He transmitted a long victory laced message to Berlin, a report meant to secure recognition for his crew. It was a catastrophic error. British listening stations triangulated the signal. The fix was not perfect, but it gave Admiral Tovey a general direction. The hunt was back on, but time was running out. The German battleship was now closer to the protective umbrella of the Luftwaffe than to the British fleet. It was at this moment of heightened desperation that the antiquated Swordfish Ray entered the story. On May 26th, a lone, American-built Catalina patrol aircraft of the Royal Air Force Coastal Command, piloted by a U.S. Navy observer on an unofficial neutrality patrol, emerged from the cloud cover. Through a break in the clouds, this pilot spotted it, a single, sharp wake of a large warship steaming east. The Bismarck had been found, her position was radioed, and the Royal Navy's forces vectored in for what they knew was their last chance. The race was now a sprint, the only ships close enough to slow the Bismarck down. Before she reached safety were the ships of Force H. All hopes rested on the aircraft. Carrier Ark Royal and her squadron of ferry Swordfish. The late afternoon of May 26, 1941, the weather in the North Atlantic is atrocious. Gale whips the sea into a fury of towering waves and driving rain. Visibility is poor, the light fading aboard the carrier Ark Royal, pitching violently in the swell. The atmosphere is thick with tension. This is the last throw of the dice. If the Bismarck is not slowed by nightfall, she will slip into the range of German air cover and the protection of U-boats. And the hunt will be over. At 19:00, the flight deck crew battles the heaving deck, wrestling with 15 ferry Swordfish of 820 Naval Air Squadron. The biplanes, looking impossibly frail against the storm, are armed with torpedoes. Their orders are clear: find the Bismarck and stop her. The pilots, observers, and gunners, soaked and chilled, clamber into their open cockpits. The engines cough to life. One by one, they are launched into the tempest, clawing for altitude through the squalls. Their first contact is a disaster. Through a break in the clouds, they spot a lone warship and dive to the attack. It is not the Bismarck. It is His Majesty's ship Sheffield, the very cruiser that had been shadowing the German battleship. A catastrophic error in communication had failed to inform the aircrews. The Swordfish pressed their attack through heavy flak, only for their new magnetic detonators to fail, the torpedoes exploding harmlessly in the ship's wake or against the waves. Dejected and low on fuel, they return to the Ark Royal. The failure is crushing. But there is no time for despair. On the Ark Royal, the decision is instant and brutal. The magnetic pistols are ripped from the torpedoes and replaced with the older, more reliable contact pistols. The same exhausted aircrews are given a new briefing: the correct position of the Bismarck. The Sheffield is still on station, and they are to use her as a guide. At 19:15, a second wave of 15 Swordfish is launched into the gathering darkness. It is their final, desperate mission. Aboard the Bismarck, the mood is one of cautious optimism. They have evaded the May fleet. They are just a day from the safety of the French coast. Lookouts scan the skies. But they are watching for the high-level bombers they expect. They are not looking for biplanes. At 20:47, the alarm bells shatter the evening. From out of the low cloud and rain, looking like ancient pterodactyls, the Swordfish emerge. They are attacking from all points of the compass, a swirling, chaotic swarm. The Bismarck's anti-aircraft arsenal erupts in a deafening, blinding storm of fire. The sky is shredded by 37 and 20 tracer rounds, creating a wall of steel through which the Swordfish must fly. The pilots hold their course, descending to near wavetop height. The spray from the ocean lashing their cockpits. They are so slow that the German gunners, trained for faster targets, consistently lead them too far. The biplanes weave through the flak, their canvas wings absorbing shrapnel that would cripple a modern monoplanes. The attack is a maelstrom of noise, fire, and courage. Most of the torpedoes miss, thrown off by the Bismarck's violent evasive maneuvers, but two find their mark. One strikes amidships on the port side, against the main armored belt. It detonates with a thunderous roar, but the Bismarck's legendary protection holds. The damage is minimal. The crew breathes a sigh of relief. They have survived. Then a single Swordfish, piloted by Sub-Lieutenant John Moffat, emerges from the starboard side. He drops low, skimming the waves. He releases his torpedo. It streaks towards the Bismarck's stern. For a moment, it seems it will pass astern, but it does not. It strikes the waterline near the portside rudder assembly. A deep, muffled thud echoes through the ship. It is not the catastrophic explosion of a magazine hit. It feels contained, but the effect is instantaneous and absolute. The great ship shudders, then begins to yaw violently to port. The helmsman reports a total loss of steering control. The rudder is jammed, locked at a 12 to 15 degree angle. Emergency. Teams are dispatched, but the report that comes back is every sailor's nightmare. The structural damage is catastrophic. The steering gear is mangled, the rudder itself wedged. Immovably, the port propeller shaft tunnel is also flooded, in the confines of the stern. Repair is impossible. The Bismarck, the terror of the sea, the pinnacle of naval engineering, has been crippled. Not by a mighty battleship's broadside, but by a single lucky strike from a weapon. Launched from the past, she is now trapped in a slow, wide turn, unable to do anything. But steam in a circle, her bow pointing towards the one direction she cannot go. The pursuing British fleet, the hunt is over, the kill is now inevitable. The night of May 26th was one of agonizing suspense for both sides. Aboard the Bismarck, the mood shifted from triumphant optimism to grim resignation. Admiral Lutyens transmitted a final, somber message to Group West: ship unmaneuverable, we will fight to the last shell, long live the Führer. Emergency teams worked frantically through the night, with divers attempting to free the jammed rudder in the flooded dark confines of the stern compartments. All efforts failed, the ship, caught in the grip of a rising gale, could only steam sluggishly towards the northwest, directly into the path of its pursuers. It was a death sentence. For the crew, the reality of their situation was inescapable. The constant, laborious vibration of the engines now served only to carry them towards their end. The initial shock of being crippled gave way to a weary, fatalistic calm. Men wrote final letters home which would never be sent. They secured classified documents for destruction and prepared for a final battle they knew they could not win. The invincible fortress had become a trapped animal. Dawn on May 27th broke over a gray, heaving sea. At 08:43, lookouts on the Bismarck's bridge spotted smoke on the horizon. Soon, the distinctive silhouettes of British warships hardened into reality. The battleship King George V, flagship of Admiral Tovey, and the Rodney, an older but formidably armed battleship with 9 16-inch guns. Closed in, the heavy cruiser Norfolk and later the Dorsetshire joined the line. They approached from the north and west, methodically, like wolves closing on a wounded stag. At 08:47, the Rodney opened fire at a range of just over 12 miles. Seconds later, the King George V followed. The world dissolved into sound and fury. The Bismarck, her steering still jammed, could only offer a slow, predictable course, making her an easy target. She returned fire, her salvos initially well-aimed, but the inability to maneuver made accurate gunnery nearly impossible. A 16-inch shell from the Rodney struck the forward command tower, likely killing much of the bridge crew, including both Admiral Lutyens and Captain Lindemann, in one catastrophic blow. The ship's fire control directors were smashed, her communications antennas shredded. For the next 90 minutes, the British battleships pounded the Bismarck at point-blank range, closing to under 3,000 yards. It was not a battle, it was an execution. The German ship was hammered into a burning, shattered wreck. Her main turrets were blasted from their barbettes, her superstructure was reduced to twisted steel, and fires raged from bow to stern. Yet, incredibly, her colors still flew, and her engines, a testament to her robust engineering, continued to turn, pushing the lifeless hulk through the water. She would not sink. By 10:15 on the morning of May 27th, the Bismarck was a scene of apocalyptic destruction. Fires raged uncontrollably. Her decks were littered with the dead and the wreckage of her armament. She was listing heavily to port, wallowing in the swell. No main guns remained operational. The British battleships, their own fuel and ammunition, critically low, ceased fire. The Bismarck was a dead ship, but she remained stubbornly afloat. The order was given for the cruiser Dorsetshire to move in and finish her with torpedoes. As the Dorsetshire approached the starboard side, a stunning sight met her crew. German sailors were beginning to abandon ship. Men were sliding down the battered hull into the freezing, oil-choked water. They had fought to the last, and now, with all hope lost, they sought to save themselves. The Dorsetshire and the destroyer Marie moved in, risking U-boat attack, to begin rescue operations. At 10:36, the Dorsetshire fired 2 torpedoes into the Bismarck's starboard side. She then moved around the stern and fired a third into the port side. Minutes later, just before 10:40, the great battleship began to roll over onto her port side, her inverted hull, a massive, dark red expanse of anti-fouling paint, was visible for a moment before she slipped beneath the waves. The location was roughly 480 miles west of Brest. Of her crew of over 2,200 men, only 115 would be rescued by the British ships before a U-boat alarm caused them to break off the operation. A handful more were picked up later by German vessels. Over 2,100 men perished. The immediate strategic consequences were profound. For the Kriegsmarine, the loss was catastrophic. Operation Rheinübung was a total failure. The Bismarck, the pride of the fleet, was gone. The heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, after a fruitless solo cruise, was forced to abandon her mission and return to port. The destruction of the Bismarck effectively ended the Kriegsmarine's faith in large-scale surface raiding. The Atlantic, Hitler, enraged and disillusioned by the loss, would increasingly divert naval resources to the U-boat arm and view his remaining surface fleet with suspicion, eventually ordering them decommissioned and their guns used for coastal defense. The brief era of the German capital ship as a strategic raider was over. For the Royal Navy, it was a victory of immense strategic and symbolic importance. The threat to the Atlantic lifeline had been decisively removed. The loss of the Hood was avenged. The Royal Navy had demonstrated its global reach, its resilience, and its ability to coordinate a complex multi-force operation under extreme pressure. Yet it was a victory tempered by the sheer scale of the human loss and the sobering realization of how close the Bismarck had come to escape. It was a triumph, but a costly and nerve-wracking one that would never be attempted again in quite the same way. The sea had claimed its Titan, leaving behind an oil slick, a few hundred survivors, and a legend that would echo through history. The Bismarck rests today some 4,800 meters beneath the surface of the North Atlantic. Ghostly, colossal wreck lying in the eternal darkness. Her story, however, has never faded. It endures not merely as a tale of naval combat, but as a profound and timeless lesson. On one level, it is a story of technological hubris. The Bismarck was the ultimate expression of the battleship era, a vessel designed to be unsinkable. Her very conception was rooted in a belief that supremacy could be engineered into steel plate and gun caliber, and yet her demise was sealed not by a superior battleship, but by a single antiquated torpedo that struck the one part of her anatomy for which there was no ultimate defense, her steering. It is a stark reminder that in warfare complexity can be undone by simplicity, and that the most critical vulnerability is often the one overlooked in the pursuit of sheer power. The saga also stands as an eternal testament to the human elements of war, the clash of leadership, the weight of decision-making, and the raw courage displayed on both sides, from Admiral Lutyens' fatalistic resolve to the desperate bravery of the Swordfish aircrews flying into a storm of flak, to the final, terrible endurance of the Bismarck's crew. It transcends mere machinery. It is a human drama of choices and consequences, of skill and chance, played out on the most unforgiving of stages. Ultimately, the hunt for the Bismarck marked a symbolic turning point. It was the last great gunnery duel of the battleship age, and the first great victory won by naval air power. The biplane that crippled the giant signaled a fundamental shift in how war at sea would be waged from that moment forward. The Bismarck was a legend of a passing era, hunted down and killed by the emerging tools of the next. Her wreck is more than a war grave. It is a monument to the end of one epoch and the brutal, undeniable dawn of another.